Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today's case is a very known infamous case and I wouldn't be surprised if you guys have heard about it or even watched a movie about it. If you guys have seen Boys Don't Cry, you guys know exactly what case I'm talking about. And this case is very sensitive and I would like to just say viewer discretion is advised. Brandon Teena was born on December 12th, 1972 in Lincoln, Nebraska to Joanne Brandon. And Brandon actually never met his father due to him being in a fatal car accident 8 months prior to his birth. Brandon had an older sister named Tammy, and both Brandon and Tammy lived together with their grandmother. And at about the age of 3, Brandon's mother had came back into his life to take custody of him and his sister. Brandon was always described as a tomboy. When Brandon began to feel a little bit more comfortable, he began identifying as a male, and this was particularly during his adolescent years, and his mother unfortunately did not approve of Brandon identifying as male and would continue to still call him her daughter. Regardless of this, Brandon continued to live his life as a male and didn't really care about what his mother had to say. He even dated a female while he was in his adolescence, and he continued to just be himself regardless of what his mother had thought of him. Both Brandon and his older sister did not have the best childhood and dealt with things that no child should have to deal with. Both Brandon and Tammy were SA'd by their uncle for several years during their childhood, and later on in Brandon's life, he would seek out therapy to cope with this trauma and dealing with the SA. For Brandon, this had to be extremely difficult because not only was he battling the struggle with his gender identity, but as well as his own uncle was assaulting him. So I can't imagine the emotions and the trauma that he was going through as an adolescent. When Brandon became an adult, he just knew that he needed a fresh new start away from all of the drama and all of the trauma that he went through living with his mother, as well as the assaults that he went through with his uncle. So he decided that he was going to move to Falls City, Nebraska in 1993. Here is where he moved in with Lisa Lambert and his soon-to-be girlfriend, Lana Tisdale. He also befriended 2 ex-convicts whose names were John L. Lauder and Marvin Nissen. When Brandon was transitioning into this move and meeting new people and just surrounding himself with people that he never knew before, he did not tell anybody that he was transgender. And I would also like to point out that during the 90s specifically, Nebraska was known to be an ultra-conservative state, and Brandon should not have felt obligated to tell anyone that he was trans. I know that there are a lot of people who are going to be out there saying that he should have said his gender identity, but the truth is, it's up to Brandon whether he feels comfortable or not to speak out on who he is and what he feels. I don't think that in this particular case it should have even been a thing that Brandon's gender identity. I mean, a lot of people would like to sit here and victim blame Brandon for what happened to him, but at the end of the day, he was not obligated to tell anybody his gender identity, and it was nobody's business. Obviously, during the time, Lana had no idea that Brandon was trans. She knew that she had met him and just found him just extremely attractive, and Lana and Brandon's relationship only lasted about 2 months, and Lana had claimed that both her and Brandon were never intimate, but Lana's mother claims that Brandon and Lana's relationship was very intense. She stated that Lana would be all day long with Brandon, she had trouble sleeping, and all Lana truly cared about was the relationship she had with Brandon. During this time as well, Brandon had a close relationship with Marvin and John, and they were all under the assumption that Brandon was a biological male. However, this all changed on December 19th, 1993, when Brandon had got arrested for check forgery and was put into jail for several days. During this time, the local newspaper had printed out that Brandon was transgender and his birth name. This meant that Lana, John, and Marvin had found out, and all the other people in the town as well. And I would also like to reiterate again, Nebraska during this time is an ultra-conservative state, and they did not take Brandon being transgender very lightly. He got ridiculed not only by the people who knew him, but as well as the town. Sources say that Brandon and Lana's relationship continued after finding out that Brandon was trans, but Lana claimed that she just wanted to be friends with Brandon afterwards, and authorities would later say that Lana continued to defend Brandon after all of the scrutiny that he got from the town as well. and also from authorities. She would state to authorities that she saw Brandon and she saw him undressed and she knew that he was a man. And the reason why she did this was in hopes to get people to leave Brandon alone. Unfortunately though, this cannot be said about John and Marvin. Both John and Marvin began to harass Brandon and scrutinize the relationship between Lana and Brandon. Both John and Marvin were extremely infuriated by Brandon being trans, so much so that on December 24th, 1993, during a Christmas Eve party, John and Marvin had overpowered Brandon and had forced him to pull down his pants to show Lana that Brandon was a trans man. They didn't even stop there, by the way. Hours later, they beat up Brandon and forced him to get into a car with them. And when driving, they actually pulled over and assaulted Brandon. Then they took him back to Marvin's place and forced him to take a shower, and both John and Marvin actually threatened to silence Brandon if he decided to report this assault. The fact that both of these two men are so extremely evil to the point that they decided to just take out their anger on Brandon. The whole entire story is just so mind-boggling how somebody can be so entirely evil. If they did not agree with Brandon's lifestyle nor his gender identity, they could have just stopped talking to him. To go so far to assault him and to try to embarrass him in front of Lana, even though Lana did not care what Brandon was, she just wanted to be friends with him or to be with him, is extremely baffling. During this time, Brandon actually escaped through the bathroom window and fled to Lana's house. Here, Brandon confided in Lana and Lana's mother about the assault that just took place, and both Lana and Lana's mother actually convinced Brandon to report the assault after he was so terrified and just didn't know what to do. Both of them convinced him and he was able to go to the police. However, when Brandon went to report his assault, instead of him being comforted and listened to, the sheriff actually judged Brandon and criticized Brandon for his lifestyle, even would ask him disturbing questions to try and make Brandon relive the trauma that he just went through. The sheriff also stated that he could not believe someone who lies about their gender. He also refused to believe that John and Marvin made Brandon pull his pants down, and he failed to arrest John and Marvin. This was the worst mistake that the sheriff could have possibly done. The fact that Brandon's gender identity mattered so much to the sheriff instead of actually trying to fight for justice like they are supposed to do is extremely alarming to me, and everything that's about to happen could have been avoided if the sheriff would have just went and arrested John and Marvin. Brandon did not deserve anything that happened to him. He had enough bravery to go to the authorities and to tell them his story and what happened, and they just sat there and acted like he was not human. After Brandon felt completely ashamed and judged by the sheriff, he began hiding out at Lisa Lambert's apartment. Both John and Marvin were deeply infuriated with Brandon for being a trans man, and they just kept thinking about this even after the assault. They felt betrayed by Brandon, that they just could not fathom that Brandon was a trans man. So they decided that they were not done with him, and they went on December 31st, 1993. They broke into Lisa Lambert's home where Brandon had been hiding out at the time, and they sat there and they shot and stabbed Brandon to death. They also murdered Lisa Lambert and a friend named Philip Devine. The only survivor in the home was Lisa's child. Not only did they take Brandon's life, but they also took 2 other people's lives who were just in the home. This is so infuriating, especially because if the police would have just taken John and Marvin into police custody, no one would have gotten hurt. There could have been a further investigation. They both could have been locked up for what they did. What's even more infuriating is that movies had came out after Brandon's death, and one of the movies was called Boys Don't Cry. And they talked a lot about Brandon's story and they portrayed it in certain ways. We all know what movies do. They like to leave out certain aspects of it. And when they were talking about the victims, they left out a specific man named Philip Devine. And Philip Devine was a black man, and a lot of scrutiny came with that because he was completely left out of the movie as if his life did not matter. It was very disturbing to hear about this because I remember myself watching Boys Don't Cry when I was younger, and I had no idea that there was a third victim. And the fact that when I was researching this case, I had no idea who he was, I didn't know about it, I felt the need to mention it. Because of course, while yes, we are focusing on the trans life that was lost and the transphobia that stemmed from that, we also need to talk about other people as well, including Philip Devine, because he was a victim. For whatever reason, they decided then and there they were going to kill Philip Devine, and his life also needs to be mentioned as well. So I wanted to take time to mention him as well. Obviously, during the murder, Lana was not present. She was only 30 minutes away at her mother's home when the murders occurred. And the next day, on January 1st, 1994, the bodies were discovered by Lisa's mother, Anna Mae. And it didn't take long for John and Marvin to be convicted of murder. John was sentenced to death in 1996, and Marvin was sentenced to life in prison in 1995. Now, this case is very infamous. A lot of people know about this case, and Brandon truly did not deserve what happened to him. He just wanted to live his life as who he was. He didn't bother anybody, and the fact that even afterwards, the Nebraska County continued to be transphobic towards Brandon. Even after what happened to him, they would use lines in the newspaper such as cross-dresser or he's living a double life and this is why this happened, continuously blaming the victim for other people's actions when we really need to be looking at Marvin and John for committing a hate crime against Brandon for something that wasn't even wrong. He didn't do anything to them. They just simply did not like how he identified. It's just mind-baffling that even though an innocent life was lost, the county, the Nebraska state continued to scrutinize Brandon instead of standing with Brandon and realizing that they have a problem. Nebraska has a problem. America has a problem. Because of course, during that time in the 90s, being trans was not openly accepted as much as the LGBTQ community was not accepted during that time as well. In some states, there might have been some exception, but majority of the states did not accept the LGBT community. Brandon's case actually brought a lot of awareness to the loss of trans lives, and I think that that is something good that did come out of the case. May Brandon rest in peace, and may Nebraska, hopefully their laws have changed in the way they're reporting stuff. Especially I was also reading that the sheriff was sued for a wrongful death suit because he failed to arrest John and Marvin after Brandon confided in him getting assaulted. And of course the family did win this wrongful death suit because this all could have been avoided if Brandon was taken seriously. The sheriff allowed his judgment to be clouded by what he thought was wrong. Instead of thinking that this person needed help, he landed on the sheriff to try and gain some help and get these people off the streets. But instead, he sat there and did not care about Brandon. Let me know what you guys think of this case. Have you guys heard of this case? It's very infamous, so I wouldn't be surprised if you guys heard of it. Leave your thoughts down below and like and subscribe and follow for more true crime.